Hey there YouTube, this is going to be something of an all over the place video about a man whom I greatly admire because of the work he produces, a man who can't really be described as anything in particular. He's not just an author and a writer and a poet, he's also an artist, a painter, a scriptwriter, a director, a producer. He's a Renaissance man in the truest sense of the word. He is a creative individual through and through. If you sliced him open, I'm sure he would bleed paint and ink. And it seems that he's done something with his life that is something that I would like to do with my own, which is he's made a life out of his imagination. He has a capacity to envisage the strange, the transcendental, in a manner that I've never ever seen from another writer. His paintings, on the other hand, ironically, his paintings are not as strange or as surreal as the stuff that appears in his literature. They do have a certain surreal and fantastical element, but they tend to be much more specific and concrete than the images that appear in his written work. And though I enjoy his art very much, I do prefer his written work. I think his command of English is beautiful. He has this way of exploiting the ambiguity of words so that words will turn up in contexts where you would never have imagined using them before, but when you read them, it works beautifully. I'm referring to Clive Barker, whom I'm sure most of you out there will probably recognise as the writer and director of the 1980s film Hellraiser, which is an adaptation of his novella The Hellbound Heart. Now, Hellraiser, I've done I spoke about in my review of the film, is one of the seminal horror films of the 1980s. It's kind of wrong to call it a horror film, really, because like most of Barker's works, even those that are categorized as works of horror they aren't exclusively preoccupied in the manner that, say, certain Stephen King works are, with scaring or grossing out the audience. They always have other elements. The way Barker himself describes it is that if Stephen King is about the horror of horror, he's about the appeal of horror. He is interested in why we keep coming back to things that frighten and disturb and repulse us. And it's that tension that interests him primarily in most of his works. Combined with that, you have a sense of the metaphysic. Barker is a metaphysician in the truest sense of the word. He is interested in the inner life of the imagination, in dreams, and in experiences that have no basis in rationality or utilitarianism. His books are full of visions and magic and monsters, demons, angels, and entities that exist entirely outside of those spectrums. But uniquely for this kind of fiction, if you can call if you can categorize Barker's fiction as belonging to any particular kind, which is problematic. If you walk into any bookstore, check out Waterstones for example, and try and find some of Barker's works, you'll find them all over the place because they don't know how to categorize them. You'll find them in the general fiction section, you'll find them in the erotic fiction section, you'll find them in the gay literature section, you'll find them in science fiction and fantasy and children's literature, because they are very difficult to categorize. The monsters and the inhuman or abhuman creatures in Barker's works are realized entities, by which I mean they are not entities based on particular archetypes. Even those that are more simplistic, like angels and demons, actually have their own existences that have complexities and ambiguities that stand outside of the moral and theological restrictions that they traditionally operate under. And this is what Barker seems to want to do with his fiction. He's taking the standard tropes and the restrictions under which fantastical literature has started to function and blows them apart. He's interested in exposing how we as human beings exist simultaneously in realms of our own imaginations and waking reality. Many of his narratives, such as Weave World, for example, involve the melting of those two, of that dichotomy, of those distinctions. The real and the imagined are dissolved and thrown together. In the same instance, you have a significant amount of transcendental and metamorphic imagery. His characters flay themselves, sometimes quite literally. They transform, they rip themselves open and transform, sometimes forcibly, sometimes of their own accord. But his characters are in constant flux. They are not entities that exist as archetypes or as monoliths in the same way that, say, the characters in The Lord of the Rings do. The characters in The Lord of the Rings, the Lord of the Rings is something that inspired Barker early on, but it's something that he acknowledges the flaws of, if you like, or the elements that don't interest him, in the same way that Terry Pratchett does. One of the flaws he perceives in The Lord of the Rings is that the characters don't change. Even when it seems they do, they don't. The hobbits, despite going on this journey whereby they see the parameters of their own world exploded to the point where they suffer, all of the comfort and the certainty of their world is destroyed, they return to the Shire more hobbity than ever. Whereas the characters in Barker's fiction can never go back home, ever. There's nothing conservative about Barker's fiction, nothing at all. And many people, I imagine, will be shocked reading a lot of his work. It's often graphically sexual. There's a profound erotic element in Barker's fiction, and it doesn't operate within restrictions either. Barker himself is a gay man, but his fiction and most of his characters can be described as sexually ambiguous at best. In fact, in his I'd argue his most significant work, his magnum opus to date, Imagica, there is a character called Gentle. And Gentle is this omni-sexual character who cannot control his own libido, and eventually ends up falling in love, appropriately enough, with a creature that doesn't have a sex. It's not androgynous, it's not asexual. It's a creature that exists in a sexuality that exists in a gender slot that exists outside of the male-female spectrum. This is the kind of thing that Barker envisages all of the time. These utterly abstruse concepts that are manifested as characters or events. Imagica specifically is a book of ideas. Imagica is one of the few books where he specifically sets out to explore a particular set of perspectives. In this instance, it's his spiritual and religious perspectives. It's a book about God. It's a book about religion and about personal spirituality. It's also a book about sexuality and genocide and repression, men and women, and so many other things. It's a big book, and that puts a lot of people off, but Magica is that dense, and I'm not kidding, it is huge. But it's such a superb book, it's so beautifully written, and the characters are so engaging that it doesn't matter. I've read Magica in a day before because I can't put it down when I start reading it. It is beautiful.